I'm Gus Bova. I'm a staff writer with the Texas Observer. Live up here in Austin, but I've been lucky enough to do a number of stories down in the Valley. And just want to say thank you for attending the Observer's first virtual News and Brews town hall. The Observer is an investigative magazine covering topics like the environment, civil rights, indigenous affairs, politics, and culture. This training is part of a larger project our community engagement team is pursuing. Over the next year, our team will be working with community leaders, advocates, and local reporters to survey residents in undercovered regions of the state about what their media coverage needs are. There'll also be training communities on how to use the tools of journalism to address community issues and highlight marginalized voices. Today's event is a partnership with Trucha, an independent multimedia company working to showcase authentic stories and creativity in the Rio Grande Valley. And it's also in collaboration with the RGV Equal Voice Network, a grassroots organization that works to advance human rights and quality of life for historically marginalized groups in the region. Today's panel will be hosted by Reynaldo Leaños, the legend of South Texas audio journalism, the voice of the Valley, I think. I don't know if I just made up that nickname, but that's it now. Reynaldo used to be with Texas Public Radio and has since moved on to the bright lights of Latino USA. And while at Texas Public Radio, his work was frequently featured on NPR's national news shows like Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and Weekend Edition, as well as NPR's newscasts. And prior to that, he was a freelance journalist in the RGV and in New York City. His work has appeared on PRX's The World and Global Nation, NBC News, NBC Latino, Latino USA, and KUT's Texas Standard. So from there, I'll go ahead and hand it off.
All right, thank you, Gus. And I just wanted to say, I mean, you're an incredible reporter and you've done some great, pieces that a lot of us down here in the Valley always have appreciated. So thank you for all the work that you've done. And yeah, before we begin our discussion today, I would like to introduce our panelists. First up is Sadie Hernandez. She is a digital communications specialist born and raised in the border town of Brownsville, Texas. She has worked in state and federal policy and electoral work around reproductive and immigrant rights since 2013. Sadie was honored in Teen Vogue's first class of 21 under 21. She was part of a Shorty Award-winning digital campaign, and now she co-leads social media and digital content campaigns at United We Dream, which is the largest immigrant youth organization in the nation. Also on our panel is Ismael. He's a Rio Grande Valley native. Ismael got involved in student organizing while getting a degree in computer science from UTRGV. And during his time there, he worked at the student newspaper where he started developing experience in social media management. Now he is using his experience and skills to be a part of Trucha. Also on the panel is Tanvi Varma, and she's a journalist with KRGV, the Rio Grande Valley's #1 news channel. Tanvi has reported on immigration, the border wall, and politics for a little over a year now. And her focus is to make sure that our conversations are all inclusive and reframed around people and not policies. And lastly, but not least, on our panel is Roberto Alejandro Lopez. Robert is a community outreach coordinator in the Racial and Economic Justice Department at the Texas Civil Rights Project, which is also known as TCRP. And he is based in Texas's Rio Grande Valley, which is on the southern border. And he is an outreach coordinator. He leads the REJ program's advocacy work against the growing militarization on the south border. He studied engineering at Cornell University, and he is a proud native of the Rio Grande Valley. He hopes that his work will contribute to the day when all people can move across Earth with dignity, without fear, and a welcome from all. And so I guess with that being said, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And one of the first things that I kind of wanted to like ask our panelists, um, so that we have viewers, from wherever and stuff like that. I want them to get to know you all, a little bit more. So we can go around, and kind of just tell our viewers briefly a little bit about what do you all do, and also how did y'all get into the work, that y'all are doing now?
Thank you, Reynaldo. I can go first. My name is Sadie Hernandez. My pronouns are she, her. I currently live in Brownsville, Texas. And as the introduction said, I started this advocacy work around 2013. The precursor to that was I was really into like punk music. So I was a little bit more aware of what was going on, but not really taking action. And it wasn't until I moved to Austin where the summer of 2013 happened. Wendy Davis took over the Capitol with a bunch of people across Texas fighting for abortion rights. And so I was there. That was my first experience ever in in-person advocacy, in being at the Texas State Capitol and seeing what organizing does to make movement changes, whether it be policy or cultural. And from then on, I started working in reproductive justice and abortion rights with Planned Parenthood, Advocates for Youth, and doing abortion rights not only in the state of Texas, but in federal policy level. And through that work and through the intersectionality of just the way our world works and how white supremacy hurts us all in different ways, I transitioned into the immigrant rights movement in about 2019 and have been working at United We Dream since. And I retired from organizing grassroots on the ground and kind of transitioned into digital communications, where I was helping young people tell their stories, talk about why their experiences matter and how they can create change, but also bring others into the work to also create change alongside them. So right now I'm currently doing digital content curation, the campaigns you see, whose stories are being told, how are they being told, what type of media is being used, and kind of thinking strategically about that. And it's really great to be here with y'all today, because when we talk about amplifying people's voices, journalism comes in, especially on all medias. We talk to our young people about, writing letters to the editor, all the way up to coming out on MSNBC. And so different types of storytelling for our people to get the justice we deserve and really create radical change in our communities.
I can go next. So I started organizing when I was a senior in high school. My first, how I started getting organized was in a Get Out to Vote campaign with Arise in my community. And after that, when I went into college, I was very involved with Texas Rising, and I would participate in being present at actions and at events put on by Planned Parenthood, which Sadie worked at before, and also being a student leader at the Texas Rising chapter at the university. And what they did is they provided a lot of education and opportunities for students to learn about the issues that are affecting Texas and about how the legislator affects all these issues and how we can go to Austin to lobby in support of reproductive health care and in support of voting rights for youth. And after that, when I finished my degree with computer science, I have been working as a programmer, so as a backend engineer, but most recently in the last year, I've been supporting the effort which was developed, which has become Trucha. And so I'm supporting with digital efforts and technical efforts with the software and the websites. So that's where I'm contributing to this effort. And what I bring with me is the experience of organizing and also the technical ability. And so that's how I'm contributing to Trucha. And I'm happy to be here and talk more about Trucha and our efforts.
I can go next. Thank you guys for having me. You guys are an awesome group of people. How I got in journalism, it started actually when I was 11 and started experiencing depression. It was a really difficult part of my life, and it's something that I still deal with. But when I got into high school, I decided to make a video talking about my story and talking to others. We had a suicide cluster in my community, super competitive, majority Asian community, so a lot of stigma around having emotions. And I ended up raising $64,000 for people who are low income who can't afford mental health services. And that's when it clicked in me that there is a power in sharing stories and that it can be done altruistically. And that's when I made up my mind that I was going to do journalism. And I truly believe that journalists have the power to be the good police and hold people accountable in the court of people's opinion, which is super powerful nowadays and pretty much always. And I truly, truly believe that if people have the context and the subtext behind an issue, it's almost impossible to be prejudiced. But that is if you're willing to accept the facts.
Thank you, Tanvi. And I can finish this off here. So yes, Roberto Lopez with TCRP. And my journey has been very much a bit of like a 180. So coming from like a bit of a conservative background, it took me some time, but one of the things that really influenced me was getting this internship through the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and that sent me to DC in 2014 to work with Congressman Villa. And that was during the unaccompanied minor, sort of one of the first increase in immigration that we saw of mostly family units and children in the recent decade. And so at that time, it just seemed like things were insane. I was over in DC and I felt like I wanted to come home, and I saw that you know, the only images that were representing McAllen, for instance, was just what we the cages at the Ursula Processing Center here. And so I think that summer really just flipped a switch, and I went back to school, and I didn't want to go into engineering anymore. So I decided to try and change course, and came home and taught high school math for a little bit, and eventually landed at TCRP where I was volunteering. And at the time, that's sort of when things really started to heat up in immigration. We were doing DACA renewals, and we were trying to get people those renewals before the rescission was up. And as time went on, more and more terrible stuff came down: the family separation crisis, Remain in Mexico, expulsions, you know, everything that we're at right now. And so, you know, what I do is we try to figure out creative ways, either through legal avenues or through advocacy avenues with digital amplification, with protests, whatever it takes to try and get these stories of what's going on here at the border, and try to move people's hearts and minds to make everything better. It's a lot of losing, but there are some really good moments there. So that's what I do, community organizer with TCRP.
Great. I mean, well, thank you all for sharing. You know, I just think, you know, it's important, like, you know, for people in our community who might not know you all, get to know you all a little bit more. And for people who may not be from here, you know, get to listen to some of the stories from, you know, from us down here. And so another thing I just wanted to do to kind of like break the ice and stuff is today's discussion, you know, is really about the Rio Grande Valley and specifically Brownsville. And I think that people across the state who, you know, maybe aren't from down here or have their own ideas, right, of like what our community and region looks like, they have like their own perceptions or whatever. So I wanted to like once again go around and anyone can start this off. Just by talking a little bit about, you know, what is one of your favorite things about the RGV or Brownsville, and why is that, you know, your kind of favorite thing from our community down here?
I can go first.
Oh, go for it, Ismael. Go.
Thank you. So for me, being in the border is being like between the two cultures. So we have the United States and Mexico, right? So being having people, or almost the majority of us, who can speak like Spanish and English, and also having family on both sides of the border and having experiences on both sides of the border. Myself, I grew up in I was born in San Luis Potosí, and I lived in Reynosa, and then I crossed over actually through the river when I was around 4 or 5 years old. And then, so I still remember that vivid memory of like crossing the border. So that's an experience that is shared amongst a lot of people in our community. And that's something that you can't get like inside of Texas, right? Beyond the border. And also we have just the amount of nature that we have here in the valley is really rich and important, and something that we value, and that brings a lot of tourists. So there's economic value that sometimes people bring up, like what's the value of the valley? Like that's one of the things. If that's your only importance, like there's value in the nature that we have here, which is very pristine compared to lots of areas of Texas where they have been damaged or where they have been polluted. So there's some things that I like about the valley.
Yeah, and just kind of branching off from what Ismael was saying, the nature and like the environment is just it's really beautiful. So when I was pretty, so my mom had me at like a really young age and had to stop college for a bit, and then a few years later, started up again, and so I would go to classes with her, and she would take me around the university in Brownsville, and we would go by the parks, and because she was studying biology, I got to take part in some of her like herpetology classes, and like she showed me butterfly exhibits that her classmates were working on. So from like a really young age, I saw just the really beautiful side of the valley, the butterflies, the parrots, the river itself. I mean, there's a lot to see. And I guess I have that connection of just learning. My mom walking around having like tacos in the morning, like the sunrise is coming up at the university. So yeah, I think Brownsville is just an incredibly beautiful city, and we have some pretty great sunrises and sunsets.
That's an awesome story. Wow, that's so cool that you got to do that with your mom. Since you guys have spoken to the nature, which is literally some of the best in the country, we have tons of endangered wildlife here and globally renowned spots like the Wildlife Preserve, which might be lost to the border wall, has 70 different types of birds that are extremely beautiful. Literally, people from all over the world come there. So we have that element. But what I'd say sticks out to me as a city person, grew up in California, San Jose, and then went to the University of Southern California in LA. The culture here is so warm and welcoming. And of course, that comes from Mexican culture. I mean, people here who are adults will call me mija, and it makes me feel like super welcome, and it makes me feel loved. And for y'all, it's probably normal, but for us, it's not. I'm like, whoa, like you're totally going out of your way to let me know that you have my back. And that's something that I haven't seen anywhere else. So I'm very grateful.
Well, Tanvi, thank you for that, because it's kind of transitioning into what I was going to say. My favorite thing, honestly, is the valley attitude. Like when you're out of the valley and you see someone in a room, you're like, that person is from the valley. Megan Thee Stallion made famous, but that's a valley thing. But really, it is all about, just solidarity between each other. The valley rides or dies for its people. Like when we talk about organizing in the valley, like the valley has produced some of the best organizers, across the state of Texas. Like, for us, it is really a trip to go anywhere, especially the capital, to talk about policy and everything like that. Really like 6+ hour drives, but we're ready to do it and go and ride for our people. We understand, why people in our community are seen as complacent, but when you actually meet the people from here, no, like they want, like we are the people who give it to us straight, stop with the BS, and it's just the valley attitude of, I'm here to make my life for myself and my community, and if anyone's going to mess with that, like we're not going to let it happen. And so when we talk about storytelling and organizing, it's really from the core of that valley attitude about like, we ride or die for the 956, and I love it.
Fun fact, I actually I have a 956 tattoo on my finger from the RGV. But anyways, yeah, so I mean, kind of going off that, I mean, part of our discussion today, right, it's going to be about like journalism. It's going to be talking about storytelling and representation. And so I wanted to address this next question to both Robert and to Sadie. Since both of you work in advocacy spaces and you all are pretty much like in tune, you know, with the community and have been for a long time, you all have your ears to the ground, you know, about what people are saying, how they feel. And when we talk about coverage in our area, what have you seen, you know, or heard from community members that maybe reporters either locally or even nationally, you know, have gotten wrong in the past? Or just stories in general, you know, that you would like to like highlight that have maybe not been like told, you know, through the full scope of things?
I mean, I could talk about this all day, but let me start off with the positives, right? When we talk about things that are right in national media, the Valley has been creating this, you know, group of really trained and skilled organizers that teach others how to tell their story in a very strong way. So we have so many strong storytellers, not only from just, you know, organizing and practicing, but also, you know, just from our culture. Storytelling is such a big thing. So we are very strong storytellers. We ride or die for our community, like I said. So I think that shines through in a lot of the media coverage. But when we talk about the negatives and what's being overlooked or what's not being told correctly, first things first is, you know, when you think about the Valley outside of the Valley, it's always some sort of sob story, some sort of trauma porn. Oh, look at these people, they are living under XYZ conditions. But who is telling that story? When we're echoing those sentiments about complacency and people not being politically active or aware, those are wrong. And the people echoing those things are usually the people that want to keep it that way. We talk about like law enforcement and, you know, white people that did not grow up in the Valley who are now in positions of powers. And, you know, Texas politicians like Greg Abbott, the governor, and our senators, Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, they talk about the Valley like Greg Abbott said it was a third world country. And those are the things that are being repeated by journalists because that is a catchy thing, like, how shocking, look at what he said. Instead of uplifting the voices from the Valley, like talking about how we introduced this panel, how great it is, how beautiful it is, but instead we have outsiders controlling the narrative, and a lot of the media is echoing what's going on in the outsider perspectives versus what's going on our insider from the people who actually live here. So by centering the most directly impacted people, journalists can ensure the richness of the RGV and shine that light out. So there hasn't been a balance achieved with that yet. So right now, a lot of the press coverage, especially on the national scale, has been very negative about our people. And this whole idea of quote unquote third world country from Greg Abbott has been repeated on top of, you know, just not even fact checking. Like, I know how journalism works. A lot of it is copy paste from AP to the local stations. And when the local stations are repeating that to the people here, then it starts a negative cycle of negative self-reflection that just, you know, makes organizing here have that extra layer of breaking down that negativity that stops people from organizing in the first place.
I think, you know, for me, in terms of some of the things that people have gotten wrong, so there's kind of like a spectrum. Sometimes when we have national reporters or even statewide reporters come down, they may show up in times of crisis, like where without really studying up on immigration, and so there, you know, that sometimes that happens, or we have to kind of spend 15 minutes giving them a whole background, and when that's compounded over several reporters, it just takes a lot of time. So there's that. Locally, and you know, I think this is also just like a United States thing. There's such a depth to authority, like, you know, whatever the police says, whatever Border Patrol says must be true. And politicians, buy that and eat that up, and they repeat it in press statements, and it just kind of echoes. So I think that there's a tendency, and I know like all of us here can talk about this, for people just to kind of take whatever CBP says and run with it and print it. CBP, DHS, whatever, part of the department or agencies, without like doing a further, like a more in-depth investigation and corroborating what they're saying is even correct. So for me, I think that there's an assumption that those voices have to be present as much as they are. And so that is something that I've seen wrong. I wish as well that in the media, we would be able to kind of take a step back and see these events as they happen, not so closely, but more with 50,000 foot view, as opposed to being stuck in the moment. Because if we look at immigration, we're still at some of the lowest points in people, in terms of the absolute numbers of people crossing. CBP likes to throw out percentages like 40%, 50%. That's how much of the crossings that the Rio Grande Valley makes up. But that they don't really tell you that overall everything else has dropped. And so if you have everything else dropping, well, even if this percentage has always remained, even if this absolute value has always remained the same, well, the percentage may look up if there's a historical drop. So some of these bits of context, I think, is missing. We've only had DHS for about 20 years now, and why can't we think about what the Valley, or why can't we speak to people who can talk about what the Valley was like 30, 40 years ago, who've survived through it, who've been fine, and who didn't have this whole complex. The Equal Voice Network has an incredible video featuring Ramona Casas with Arise, where she talks about that. And so, I wish reporters would speak to people other than just authority figures. I wish they would provide more context as to whatever they're reporting, so people don't just read it and just see what may seem like a scary number, but really isn't. And I wish people from out of here would study up a little bit more.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And, also, and not for us per se, but a lot of people who don't necessarily know the Valley, right? I think the first thing that comes to them is just there's only immigration problems down here, or whatever they might think, it's only immigration that we care about. But, as everyone has said already, there's so much that, the Valley is complex, right? There's so many layers to us, but immigration, that does happen down here. It is an issue, that it is a topic that people, talk about and report on. And so I wanted to ask Tanvi, about a tweet, she sent out recently. And it says, "Dear journalists, when we refer to the increases as a crisis and inundate viewers with images of migrants moving into the United States, we're giving people the idea that there is some sort of invasion. Don't just speak about migrants, speak to them." And, I wanted to just ask Tanvi about that tweet. Why was it important, for you to say that? And just expand a little bit about that, because there is a lot of conversation about this. The AP released a memo also recently saying not to be using, that type of language. But I just wanted to ask you as the local journalist down here, about that tweet.
Thank you for asking. And Sadie and Roberto killed it. I think they nailed it. That those are very legitimate problems. And to be honest, they boil my blood, because I feel like my own kind is betraying us in a little bit. And I understand national news, they're here to get their little snippet because they don't have all the time in the world to cover everything. I understand everything has its time and place, but immigration is not one of those things that you can do like that. And networks have a boatload of money. And yes, I'm not an executive at a network, but from when I interned at networks, it's ridiculous the resources they have. And there's no excuse for not having reporters embedded in communities like these for issues that are national headlines. They're not just headlines, though. They're stories. So that tweet is part of my nature of clapping back. I'm like, always clapping back on Twitter about something that I think is ridiculous that reporters are doing. Not that I'm perfect, I make mistakes too, and I'd love to be called out. But I have seen so much footage of migrants like crossing, and that's like the whole video of the story, and they're talking to CBP or they're talking to politicians. At that point, we're talking about them, not to them. They've become the object of what we are talking about, and we are seeing them literally dehumanized through our storytelling, and we don't even realize it. It looks like an invasion, like I said on Twitter. Literally, they're showing like hundreds of migrants, on boats or running or hiding. It looks like a war zone. But where are we showing the hurricanes that made millions food insecure in Honduras? Or where is the footage of children being murdered on the streets? That footage doesn't exist, right? So that's very unfair. You cannot, that is very biased journalism. And I've made it a point that I want to try that every time I do a story about immigration, if I don't talk to a migrant, I will fight to the death to not let that story air. They need to be the center focus. So like, for example, we did a story about McAllen, the respite center, accepting more migrants, and everybody was concerned, oh, COVID, migrants are bringing COVID. They're literally not spreading COVID. Like, that's just not true. And myself, and I think Telemundo, were the only people that were like, we need to talk to the migrants. Everybody else was like, all right, Sister Norma, let's get our sound bites, let's go. And I was like, I'm not gonna leave. And we took the cameras away, and I just sat there with the migrants off camera, and I was like, hey, you're not a soundbite to me. If you don't want to talk on camera, that's cool. I just want to know, what are you going through? And once we built that rapport, if they were comfortable going on camera, I would share it. If they didn't, then there's no story to me, honestly. I mean, and that's important. I could talk about this forever and ever, but that's just an example.
Yeah, and I think before we move on, I wanted to just ask the other panelists, Sadie, Robert, Ismael, is there anything else that you want to add, to the specific topic? Just because, like, the only reason why I really want to emphasize this is because, we're being bombarded by it, right? Like literally everywhere. And it's not, I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon, but I just wanted to see if there was anything you all wanted to add, in terms of this specific conversation.
Yes, I have one little last tidbit. The story that Tanvi shared right now is a rare story. When we talk about local coverage of what's going on with the immigration issues, whether it be asylum seekers, DACA, or anything in between, like, they have chosen the side of CBP. Like, if you look at some of the local reporters, their Twitter picture, their Twitter header is them and CBP agents. So it's already very clear whose side that they're on, not only personally, and it just incredibly shows very boldly in the way that they report. So when we talk about who we trust and who is on whose side, it's very harmful, but it's very hurtful to see, because a lot of people just automatically, generally, put a lot of trust in local media over national media that we've seen, especially after the 2016 election. But when we talk about local reporting from local RGV stations, they are notorious for just being obsessed with deportation agents and framing them as heroes, framing them as factual. And that's not reporting, that's being a Stan account, in my opinion. And so I'm so glad that Tanvi is here to really highlight the stories of the people who should be highlighted. And I wish that there were more reporters like that on the local level, for people to really trust and have a more accurate, wider view of what's actually going on in our community, down the street, where our families live.
Love you, Sadie.
Robert, Ismael, did y'all want to add anything? Or if not, totally fine. We will continue talking and stuff.
I guess like a question I have too is like, I'm trying to kind of get back to the core of this too. Like I don't think we finished asking the question of like, why, okay, so Black and brown people are coming into the country. Why is that bad? Like why are we kind of talking about that a little bit more? We know that immigrants like pay more in taxes than they actually receive in terms of benefit. Like, I mean, actually, I don't have to go into the whole thing of like justifying why people can come into this country, but I also kind of wish like we would sort of stop and ask that question, like why, like why is it actually a crisis? And I guess that's the only thing that I think the answer is racism, but that's me.
To that point, historically, like during World War I and like some of the initial like ways that they passed laws for immigration, it was about and at that time like eugenics and these types of ideas were starting to increase. They used that kind of those ideas to, like when they were doing immigration laws, they would select countries like Europe, and specifically they would like do quantities of like the countries that they designated as those were like superior humans. And so that was like one of the first examples where like it's been done historically in the past, and now they've just made it more not so obvious. But yeah, definitely, I think it's like something that's like racist and something that goes back to those thoughts and ideas of eugenics, of like the superior races, and trying to bring only the people that they want to, and trying to not have other people come into the country.
And even now, they don't have to release the names of CBP officers that kill migrants. In January, a migrant was shot and killed in Hidalgo. We still don't know anything about it, and I have a report coming out about that. But in that report, I realized how shielded this institution is from accountability by the way things are set up. And if we as journalists are just furthering that narrative, we are propaganda machines. And if I'm being honest, managers at the local level don't care. Because they want good relationships with these people so they can get stories. It's a symbiosis. It's really problematic. And so, I mean, things like this, talking about these issues are super important, and it's part of how we're going to break the cycle.
Mm-hmm. And going off that, Tanvi, a little bit, I wanted to ask you this question, just for like, transparency with the community and stuff, and just, for people who may not be familiar, with like an editorial process and etc. But can you talk a little, with whatever you're comfortable sharing, talk about like your editorial process, right? Like, how does a story come to be, for you? And as Sadie said, she appreciates, the type of stories that you tell, but and also I wanted to just ask, like, what is the difference between your process and maybe some other reporters that you've noticed, that maybe don't include the full scope or etc., like from your observation and stuff?
Thank you for asking that. And actually, the answer lies in a rant that I texted Roberto. I was so angry, and I knew he would understand. I saw a piece about the unaccompanied minor increase last year, and it was a special report, and it was so long, and I won't name the journalist, the state, whatever. But the only person they talked to was CBP, and the only thing CBP said was that these kids are being used as tactics by criminals. And I was like, oh my, like, no, I was physically angry. I was so upset. And I was like, this is a joke. Like, this is an absolute joke. And I think a lot of what's missing is context, like Roberto and Sadie and Ismael were saying. We need that context. I mean, why are these people leaving? It's a humanitarian crisis. If you're going to use the word crisis, it must be followed by humanitarian, or don't say it at all, in my opinion. And so as for my editorial process, I try to stay as in touch with the news as possible. So I'm a loyal New York Times follower. I have my subscription. I read the New York Times, the Tribune, the Observer. Shout out to you guys. And also I make sure to follow a bunch of people from the community on Twitter. And I try to be involved in the community. As little as doing my work in a coffee shop, striking up a conversation with people, getting to know people and their issues. I put a lot of time in building relationships with people here. They're not just sources. And that's one of the most fun and enjoyable parts of my job. Like, I literally went to Topgolf, I don't know, like a month ago with one of my sources. And it's not for any reason but the fact that, like, these are my fellow community members. So a lot of things I get from them, and then a lot of things I get to localize from all the perspectives that I engorge through my subscriptions and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's really people like the advocates on this panel that I am totally drawn to, because they're always pushing things at the forefront, and they're from respectable institutions that I have seen that are generally in line with the truth, and therefore I follow them. And that's also how I get a lot of stuff.
And there's also this sense of like immigration, or just like any type of like amnesia. Like we forget what's literally happened within like the last year, 5 years even, and stuff. And some of that amnesia, I think, that is at least with some reporting and stuff, is kind of like the border wall also. I think people think that is kind of like said and done. And I wanted to like ask Robert, if there was anything that he wanted to like add about that, of what's going on right now.
Yeah, and also before I forget, I want to kind of touch on like I wonder, and maybe this is a question for Tanvi too that you can answer, but like how are reporters are human, like we're all human, we want to try and do some story that's sexy, right? Like that. I think maybe that's why people want to get those like behind the scenes CBP looks where you get the ride along that has the action, because that gets more clicks, it gets more views, it gets whatever. And one of the things that kind of shocked me, and it that saying of like don't meet your heroes is very true, in that I like listen to NPR, I listen to different podcasts and all this, and there was one reporter who I had the chance to kind of sit next to and listen as they interviewed a good colleague of mine. And in the interview, and this was an interview for a presidential candidate, this national reporter was trying to get my colleague to fight, essentially, like get into an argument with the person that was sitting opposite, with the other person in this interview. And the questions were so tailored and like targeted to make that happen, to sort of make an event happen. And I wonder, if like how that plays a role in how reporters see these situations, like how it's not fun, I think, to kind of show that like that Catholic Charities is doing a good job, that Sister Norma is doing a good job, that Team Brownsville, that Sidewalk School has the situation under control, and they're doing a good job. I don't think that's as sexy as saying there's a huge surge, as dehumanizing as that is. To kind of get back to what you were saying though, Ray, like about the border wall and what misconceptions there are. Yeah, I mean, like, one thing that I think the movement has kind of missed, that I have missed, that I think all of us have sort of fallen short with, and not fully. I mean, there are only so many of us, so I have to give some grace to myself and to everyone else here too. But the border wall, Trump's wall, is like the tip of an iceberg. It's the loudest, most visible part of the border complex, and so it's so easy to be drawn to it. But there's this whole system that has been growing for decades. The Border Patrol agents that have continued to grow and are now constituents in our community, and my uncle and cousins and all this stuff. And the number of drones, the helicopters have increased. The state is giving money. We have Operation Lone Star right now with Governor Abbott sending more DPS troopers down here. So in terms of what's missing, the border wall is kind of sexy, and it's like Trump is loud, and it's in your face, and it's obnoxious. But the silent things, the helicopter increase, the boots on the ground, the Predator drones that are flying over us like right now. I wish that that people knew a little bit more about how wild the amount of spending that we have in DHS has $50 billion in the budget. That's like, it gives so much money to groups like Lockheed Martin, like Geo Group, like Core Civic, like all these companies that are profiting. And I think something we also don't talk about is the good work that people at the South Texas Human Rights Center do, which is identifying bodies, because the purpose of a wall, of any wall, be it of troops, of concrete, of silicon, like the transistors and all that stuff that exists, it pushes humans to more hazardous terrain. So Yeah, I think in terms of the wall, like it could still be built in the valley. We don't really know yet. Biden hasn't said anything. And in many ways, there is a whole other complex of shadow walls that have been built that we don't really talk about.
Tanvi, did you want to respond to Robert?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so first, I really like what Roberto mentioned about kind of like getting the right soundbite, making it sexier. And I think all of us can agree that CNN is really notorious for that. I mean, like Vox did a whole piece on how they kind of mechanize their news shows like sports shows, you know, with the music and the arguing, and I literally can't. It's like toxic for me to get. So that's definitely true. I think sometimes it's necessary to rile people up. Like, for example, super small example, but like yesterday, I was working on a story with Roberto about the border wall, and Henry Cuellar's team wasn't getting back to me about like what's going to happen here. So I went to a press conference they were doing about the American Rescue Plan, and it was an event where they were giving out checks. It was all smiley, smiley, and I asked a question. Homeboy totally caught off guard, right? And you know, Congressman Cuellar, he's the nice guy. I like the guy as a person, right? But it's my job to hold him accountable. And do I have to talk to him all the time? Yes. Does it make it awkward that I follow him around and ask him uncomfortable questions? Absolutely, because then I have to like beg for an interview. But generally, they're pretty good at not blacklisting you, because if they do, then I will put that out to the public, and that's not a good look. So I'm not giving them too much credit for that. But I think at sometimes it's necessary, but mostly nowadays, I would have to agree, it's not. And I love what Roberto was saying about technology increasing and the Trump border wall being part of what makes it look more sexy. And I think it's true that if we look now that Trump's out of office, I rarely see any reporting on the border wall, let alone, you know, the border industrial complex. Because it was catchy. It was definitely something that got ratings, and that's something people can't deny.
And you know, kind of going off that a little bit, you know, we've talked a little bit about, you know, some of the reporting that we enjoy, some of the reporting that maybe needs, you know, work on, and the nuance, the importance of nuance and stuff. But I wanted to, I guess, kind of shift gears a little bit, you know, to Ismael really quick, and talk about like flipping like the narrative, right? Flipping the narrative and flipping who gets, you know, to have a voice, right, for the community and stuff, and who gets to, you know, help shift that narrative. And I wanted to read, you know, the mission statement of Trucha. I mean, it says, quote, "We are an independent multimedia platform dedicated to the people, the culture, the social movements of the Rio Grande Valley, centering queer and migrant communities of color," end quote. And that's a pretty powerful mission statement, you know. And I wanted to ask Ismael, you know, how does the Trucha team look at stories and content? And how are some of those things that y'all are doing that you wish maybe other people, you know, looked at things and topics, you know, through the same lens?
Yes, and so the way we do it is we center the people that are in the valley and the people that the stories are being written about. And so since we started this organization, the purpose was to share the stories of the valley, so we can inspire people in our community, and also so we can inform people in our community. But with that also comes the opportunity to tell our stories to people across Texas and across country and across the world who are we are under like the microscope of like the whole world watching us as we discuss like the issue of immigration. And so and like it's been mentioned throughout this conversation, like what the local media has been doing for most of this time, and it's something that they don't think they want to fix, is to be like a propaganda for the departments that deal with this issue. And so what we're trying to do is going ahead and going out to the people and telling the stories of the people. And I think our success starts with the fact that the majority of us, or the people that are running the organization, grew up in the valley, and also at least 3 of us have experience organizing in the community. So either at the student with the student population at the universities or at the colleges. We have also organized in the community with Looper or Arise with other organizations. And so that's part of our success, is that we're in organizations that since the beginning, like that's part of our vision and our mission, is to tell the stories and inform the people in our community. And we're also, the people that are running the organization are people from the own community that's being written about. So that's something that sets us apart, and that's something that we think should happen in other news organizations, especially telling the stories of the people and having them be the voice, and not like only going to the government to be the only source, because we know that they can lie and that they can tell versions that only empower the government but don't give power or do not give voice to the people.
Can we get some like claps for that? That's like so like freaking awesome.
Thank you.
I'm gonna add the little reaction, the little clappy hand reaction. Thank you, Ismael, for that. And Sadie, I wanted to see if we could briefly talk about that too, right? Like, how do you, with where you're at right now, kind of shift that narrative, right? And to bring, people, actual people from the Valley and their stories. I was hoping you could talk just briefly about.
Yeah, super quick. Storytelling starts with you. Like, a lot of people think that in order to do communications, to be in an interview with somebody, that they have to be this like proper, well-spoken, quote unquote, what is well-spoken? Who defines that type of person? And it's not really that. Like, if you have a story to tell, if something impacts you, just say it. Like, we live in the world, a global, interconnected world. Have your Twitter account, talk about like, hey, I just saw CBP, Border Patrol officer, doing something that wasn't okay. Can you help amplify this? Or, there's a lot of ways to tell your stories, that if you feel comfortable making a video, maybe you are a Snapchat, Instagram person and you like telling your stories through video. There's blogs, and there's so many ways to shift the narrative by owning it. Like, in this world, you don't have to always rely on journalists to have your own thing. And there is good and bad. Like, there are some local blogs that do some pretty cool local investigations. And then there's the negative when we talk about people who's have very popular blogs that are all propaganda. But it works both ways. And then on the last part of storytelling I want to talk about is if you're going to tell your personal story, that's great. And if you want to add information into that, like stats, facts and stuff, just make sure you're not spreading misinformation. It's very easy to spin something that you saw on one site one time. But having digital literacy in your research is very helpful to making your story stronger.
And I also appreciated earlier about how you said that, like, you're helping people write like letters to the editor. Like, that's another way to have like a seat at the table in like newsrooms or etc. Like, that's another just layer. So I appreciated you saying that. And unfortunately, I think we're kind of running out of time, and there's still so much that we could have talked about. But I wanted to go around just the panel one more time, just I guess quickly, if there was any last minute things that you wanted to add, about what we've talked about, or Sadie just brought up misinformation, as well, how to combat that. If there was just anything else y'all wanted to add.
Well, I can just close it out and say, I work at United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth network in the nation. If you are an undocumented youth or an ally, you can definitely sign up and go to our website, unitedwedream.org, where you will have resources for your DACA renewals, how to pay for that, and the latest updates on national news. We try to really keep up, but there's always so much going on. So definitely check us out for mostly national related news. We are doing something to call on our senators in regards to pathways to citizenship legislation. So if you're into that, definitely check us out. Thank you so much.
And from
go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. And as a representative of Trucha, yeah, definitely, I want to encourage everyone to support that effort. I know online we've been getting a lot of support from everyone, and we appreciate it. So this is a new venture, and definitely we need the support of people online. And also, if you want to reach out to myself or people at Trucha to tell your story, we're open, and that's our goal, to share the stories of the community. So we are definitely always open to listening and telling your story.
As for me, while I'm closing out, I love having these conversations. I learned so much from them. I'd love to talk to you guys offline. And if anybody has a story idea, please hit me up on social, or if you just want to vent or be like, this is messed up, like, I would love to listen.
Yeah, and to talk about my org too, so Texas Civil Rights Project is, we're nonpartisan, nonprofit. We have departments in voting rights as well, and criminal injustice. And we need help right now with the ledge. There are some really terrible bills that are moving forward that we're trying to kind of help people understand about what might happen in terms of voting rights in particular. But so yeah, follow us at Texas Civil Rights. I think that's our handle for like Twitter, Facebook. I think one of the things, like, just to kind of end, is we're kind of in an extraordinary moment, the Valley, I think in particular, because there's like a target on local politicians to push them more towards the conservative side, or more towards the right wing, because of what we saw in the 2020 election. And there's the saying, like, so goes Texas, so goes the nation. And well, like, I think so goes the Valley, so goes Texas. And I think that reporters are going to have a lot of power and a lot happening in the coming years. And so I hope that as you kind of see these changes that are going on, as we're talking about, progressives, moderates, conservatives, I hope that you will take the time to research, to understand our area, to know that Alamo, Texas isn't where the Alamo is, to kind of connect with people like us, and not just go towards like the authority figures, but organizers. A lot of us are young, and just because we're young, don't write us off. We know quite a bit.
Perfect. And for anyone who's like watching or listening right now, feel free to, reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions and stuff. And yeah, so thank you all, for this great, discussion and stuff. I always love, listening to you all. So thank you to our panelists, Sadie, Roberto, Tanvi, and Ismael, for joining us today. I would like to extend a special thanks to Gisela Zuniga with Trucha and Michelle Serrano with Equal Voice Network for helping the Texas Observer engagement team coordinate this event. And we would also like to thank our interpreters, Susana Pimiento and Azucena Garza with the Austin Language Justice Collective. If you live in the Brownsville region, the Texas Observer would like to hear from you. Please take about 5 minutes to fill out their general survey about information needs in the area. Those who take the survey will be entered into a raffle for 1 of 5 grocery and gas gift cards. And now I'm going to pass it back to Texas Observer reporter Gus Bova.
Well, that was great. I feel like I learned a lot from all of you, including Tanvi's puppy as well. I think was contributed quite a bit. I think y'all might have been almost a little too kind on the media, the amount of errors actually about just sort of basic geography and things in the Valley that make it into prestigious publications is actually kind of shocking. But anywho, again, I really enjoyed the conversation. And so we would like to thank Reynaldo for the excellent moderation and the panelists for their insightful contributions, and to the viewers who took some time out of their day to join us. And we would like to extend an invitation to our community journalism training, which will be at the end of this month. And there'll be more information on that in the chat. So thanks again, and hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.